everyone to the workshop between the Oshkosh City Council and our Human Resources Department regarding our health insurance program. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to John Fitzpatrick, Assistant City Manager.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Well, we're very happy to be able to provide this information to you. This is something that the council has wanted since we talked about health insurance, certainly at the last budget cycle and then the previous budget cycle. So we wanted to try to get this information to you as soon as we can. We have some new consultants that are going to be working with us, and I'll introduce them: Jan Stage and Marty Burns. And they're going to walk through the Affordable Care Act, talk a little bit about the Cadillac Tax. They're going to talk a little bit about options to reduce our claims cost, our medical plan costs, how we're doing, how we did in 2014 and 15, and then how our reserve looks year to date, and then our projected plan costs going forward in 2016, and then next steps, and then open it up for questions. So they wanted to keep it brief, so to allow for maximum dialogue and interaction. So if it's all right with you, Mayor, I'll just turn it over to Jan and Marty.
Okay. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. And Fitz has already gone through the agenda, so let's go to the next slide. Here we go. And we're going to start off with the Cadillac tax, and we have that in quotes. It is a part of the Affordable Care Act, and we've got two slides that'll go into details on what that is. And we'll just go through it. First, it's a permanent annual tax beginning in 2018 on employers that provide high-cost benefits through an employer-sponsored group health plan. There are some misnomers about the Cadillac tax and what it's taxing. And people have thought that it's penalizing high benefit plans. And it's really not true. It's really focusing on simply the cost. It doesn't matter what the deductible amount is, what the out-of-pocket is. It truly is reflecting simply the cost of the health plan. We'll get into some more details on what that means. The purpose is revenue generation. You may have heard on the news and from Congress that there's talk about changing and or repealing this. The thing that we at AFG are reminding everybody is if it's repealed and the primary purpose is revenue generation, that if this goes away, something's going to have to replace it. And so keep that in mind. Let's keep on going down the bullet points. Reduce healthcare costs by making high-cost coverage more expensive. Offset regressive nature of how the tax code currently treats health insurance. And what we mean by that is employer coverage is 100% tax-free, while individual coverage is not. Okay? So what's the impact from that? Lower income individuals less likely to have employer coverage and therefore incur a greater tax burden with respect to health insurance. Amount, here's the big amount. It's 40% of the cost of the plan that exceeds a predetermined threshold amount. If we go down to the, skip one bullet point and go down to the third one here, those numbers are $10,200 for individual coverage and $27,500 for family coverage.
That's the annual coverage in 2018. So we are having to do some forecasting on what those costs might be based on cost of the employer plans right now. So that's annualized coverage for a single plan or a family plan in 2018.
And you may recall at a prior workshop when we had discussions about it doesn't matter what our premium share is, that's the cost of the plan. So that's not city cost or employee cost, that is total cost. So we could have, in theory, we could charge the employees 100% of the premium and still be subject to a Cadillac tax. Is that a fair statement?
It is. And so with this, question is, where is the city right now with the Cadillac tax coming up? We're assuming that nothing is changing with the law, that everything's staying in place. And so if we project forward, so I'm going to let Marty go through this if it's all right.
Sure. We've done some forecasting based on your current costs, making some assumptions. The first assumption is your current costs and your current benefits, at an 8% medical trend per year. That's on average what medical costs are going up each year, is 8%. So we've built in an assumption of 8% per year from 2014's cost all the way through 2024. And then in the year that the Cadillac tax comes into play, which is 2018, we've assumed a 3% projected increase on the threshold. So the threshold is that 10.2 and 27.5. We expect, although we don't have final guidance on that, we expect and we're projecting that's going to go up by some type of general inflation number, so we forecast that at 3%. When we look at the City of Oshkosh's costs and use those two assumptions, assuming that the current surcharge that's in place is not going to be continuing in 2018, you will see that in the far right-hand column in the shaded kind of orangey, pinky orange color, based on your premiums today, the forecast for the Cadillac tax, which is a 40% excise tax, as Jan said, would be about $675,991 in 2018. And then because that ramps up at 8% healthcare cost increase per year, but only 3% threshold cost, you can see it rapidly increases. So over the next 7 years, or 8 years approximately, we go from $676,000 to just a little bit shy of $3 million for a projected excise tax liability. So this is a benchmark that many employers, all employers, are looking at in terms of how do we manage our health care costs to avoid, if possible, or at least delay for as long as possible, the Cadillac tax. So that's some forecasting that we did on behalf of the city.
So as we go forward and do strategic planning for the city, this becomes upfront. This is something we have to take into account and consider. And so in looking at the current cost and the current program, what are things that we can do to lower costs as we go forward? And we're really lumping everything into 3 categories. One being plan design, one being wellness, and one being cost of services. So we'll quickly go through each one. Cost of services is focusing on, especially since the city is currently partially self-funded, it's looking at fixed costs and the claims costs. And looking to see, are we getting best in class in those areas? And the best way to find that out is to go out to bid. And that is something we're going to be doing. We will be talking about that more as we go through the presentation. Plan design. This actually encompasses quite a bit, but simply it's looking at changing the plan design to save money. So for example, if you have a $100 deductible and you've increased it to $500, that's a change in plan design. It's also a cost shift, because if we're going from 100 to 500, who's picking up that additional cost? It's the employee who will be paying that out of pocket. Important to note, and this was back in the notes of the Cadillac tax, is that when you look at the Cadillac tax, it's the cost of the plan. The cost of out of pocket for the employee is not included in the Cadillac tax calculation.
And the other thing to remember with the cost to the employees by increasing deductible, it is a cost shift, but there is also some documented ability to cost reduce or cost shrink as deductibles go up. As deductibles go up, there's actuarial evidence that people become better consumers of health care. They think a little bit more about how to spend those dollars wisely because more of it's coming out of their pocket. We call that consumerism. So that is part of plan design. That's part of the objective and discussion points. At what point, you know, it's a combination of cost shift and cost shrinkage. So, and plan design can be deductibles, co-insurance. It can also be strategies to have employees or spouses take their own plan versus the city plan. So there's a lot that goes into plan design, and we've had some of those preliminary discussions in our strategic planning meetings that we've had with the city in the last month or so.
The last one is wellness. And the first two that we talked about, plan design and cost of services, is something that you can do and have an immediate impact. and based on what you do, it can also have a long-term impact. Wellness is not an immediate impact. It's something that you put in play, and you have a longer-term impact of reducing costs. And the idea, especially with a public employer like the city, when you get employees, you don't tend to have a lot of turnover. You tend to keep them. And so to the extent that you can work with them to improve their health, you improve their lives, but you also reduce your health care cost and their health care cost. A big focus here should be on chronic disease. And the reason for that is people with chronic disease are the ones who are most likely to have large claims. To the extent that you can identify through health risk assessments, which the city is currently doing, and then work with them to manage that, whether it's through medication or lifestyle changes, to improve health, reduce cost, reduce risk. It's a win-win at the end of the day with that. So when we do strategy discussions with the city, again, plan design and cost of services is something we can put in play right away and get a cost impact. Wellness happens over time. Put the strategy in and hopefully reap those rewards down at some point in the future. I want to point out at the bottom of the slide, we're talking about the employer-sponsored clinic. That actually helps us with two areas. One, cost of services. And just to give a simple example, if someone goes in for a doctor's office visit, let's just say it's for an acute care, meaning let's just say they have a sore throat or an earache, go to the doctor, that average cost is going to be about $100. And you may get 5 to 10 minutes of that doctor's time in that doctor's office. With the on-site clinic, we're paying by the hour. And let's just say it's $100 an hour. Actually, it's a little bit different than that, and probably a little bit less. And so just think about that. Paying for 5 to 10 minutes, $100, or paying for an hour for someone to provide medical services for an hour for people.
Multiple people at that point.
For multiple people at that point.
So that, the nurse practitioner can probably see 3 to 4 patients during that hour, maybe more, but they focus on usually 15-minute slots. So when we talk about bending the trend, that's that trend number, that 8% number that we referred to in the Cadillac tax, that's the trend number we're trying to bend. So what we're trying to do is reduce that 8% to a manageable level so that we delay or completely avoid the Cadillac tax.
That's the immediate savings. Long-term, again, is working with people on wellness, chronic disease, getting them into the clinic, getting them their meds, and having them be compliant, and also, to the extent that we can, provide coaching for lifestyle change. Next slide. What we did here was we wanted to give you a status of the health plan and how it performed in 2014 and where things are year-to-date in 2015. And so what we're looking at on this slide for 2014, we're looking at the budget amount. So this is based on setting funding levels and taking it times the number of employees enrolled in the plan. So total budget is $9,570,000. Actual expenses, this includes both fixed costs and claims, came out at $9,152,000. So the difference was $417,000. It's a loss ratio of almost 96%. That's a very good year for a self-funded plan. Okay. So far in 2015, and this is through April, budget amount $3,625,000. Actual spent $3,113,000. Difference $512,000. Running at about an 86% loss ratio. Again, very good. Plan is running very well.
Jan, could you define loss ratio?
You bet. It's the difference between what we're budgeting or expecting and then comparing that to what's actually been spent.
So for every dollar, for example, that you budgeted, you've spent about 86 cents.
So if we're budgeting perfectly, it's a 100% loss ratio. Okay. And if things are doing better, we're coming in under that. In both years we are. If we're coming in over, that's...
We don't like that.
Yes, that's over 100%. We want to avoid that.
Nobody likes being over budget, right?
We haven't used this metric. We haven't been using this metric with council in recent years, so when Jan and Marty suggested it, this is something that you can look at very easily. Our loss ratios were over 100% in 2011, 12, and 13. So that's kind of where we were. This was our turnaround year, so we were really pleased with that. But the few years before that, it was over 100%.
Can any of that be contributed to the clinic? Or is it too
Well, not for
outdated?
14.
No.
14 is all, in
But
fact, I
15.
teased the folks at Associated that you can't take credit for this, you're just getting the credit for reporting it, but sometimes messengers get shot and they get hugged, this messenger's getting hugged, but this was all pre-clinic in 14. Your question does perhaps
at.
have some relevancy for 15, but I think you guys would say it's a little early.
Yeah, it'd probably be a little early, but we do know that there's kind of a sentinel effect. When you start talking about wellness and engagement and paying attention to healthcare costs, even if things aren't implemented yet, people do pay attention. So there's a little bit of a sentinel effect that might have taken place, but it's a little early to give credit to the clinic. It opened in February. This data is through April. We feel confident that the clinic is going to have a very good positive impact on your bottom line, but I don't know that we can actually plug it into these numbers just yet.
Okay.
We'll go to the next slide. Medical plan reserve balance. We wanted to give everybody an update on the history of the reserve balance. So up in the upper left, we're showing the year end 2011, and then we're showing through budget 2015. And as you can see, we've had some ups and downs. 2014 has gone to the positive, and year to date, 2015, it's at 2.8. And so it's definitely going in the right direction. There's a bar chart on the bottom, just another way of demonstrating it. On the top right, what we're doing here is, the question may be about reserve balance and what's the right amount. And so what we're sharing here is standard in the industry is 3 months of claims, or some will state it as 25% of your budget amount for claims. And so that's what we're showing here. We're showing the budget amount of claims for 2014 at $9,228,000. If we take 1/12 of that, we get $769,000. We take that times 3, it's 2.3. So again, that's a standard. It does depend on the comfort level of the employer. And with the history here, there's, you can understand why you might want to have a little bit more than the 2.3 standard. So I just wanted to share that number with you.
And our goal was to end 2015 with $2.5 million. We ended 2014 with, almost 2.4, so we did very well. And right now we're ahead of that pace, but we always say we're ahead of the pace. We're not. So ask me in December where we are, and we'll give you hopefully a better answer. But our target was to land at 2.5. Right now we're ahead of that target, so that's very good.
Mark, 12 and 13, those reserve balances, that was due to the high incidence of claims, and that our loss ratio was over 100%?
Our loss ratio was over 100%, plus we were losing people, so we were losing money on the revenue side as well as still spending on the expenditure side as if those people never left. And Jan, we shared with Jan some of our theories, and he gave us more of a, probably an actuarial answer, but actuarials don't believe in luck. And I was like, we've had a bad run of luck, and actuarially that luck doesn't exist, but he doesn't.
Those of us that aren't actuaries believe in luck.
But we've had some bad luck. And in 2014, I think finally the table started to turn, and that's good luck. So, you do believe in luck. So you got a rabbit's foot in your pocket there.
Yeah, I'm not an actuary.
Okay.
Yep, and I believe in luck too. The only thing I'd add to Mark's explanation is we did use a little bit of the reserve to offset some of the spiking trends, and that's what the reserve can be used for as well. So we judiciously used a little bit of that to moderate some of those spiking costs, and now we've built that back up to the level that is appropriate again.
You may recall that we were throwing out a couple different numbers in the past about the reserve. We had, well, you need 800 plus you need this. But as we've learned over the last couple months, the way that things are in the health insurance business, well, just in business in general, with automated claims and things like that, things get paid a lot quicker than they used to. So this 3 months is a pretty solid number. We don't have to play around with, well, we have this plus that. 25% of claims is a good, solid number. They've demonstrated to us, we're very comfortable with that. So even though it's 2.3, the thing you have to consider is, should costs go up, your reserve then needs to go up. So our job is to keep our costs down so our necessary reserve goes down. In the past, it was just kind of, well, you just accept it as a given that the costs are going to go up. We got to figure out ways to get our costs down. And that's, so the 2.3, I'm very comfortable with. Trina's very comfortable with it. So if we land at 2.5 or higher, we will be very satisfied with how we're doing this year.
Okay. Next slide. So what we've done up to this point is share information on the past and present. Now let's take a look at the future. And that's what this slide is doing. We're looking at 2016 and projecting forward what we expect costs to be based on the information we have. And so what we've done here is we've broken down all of the costs by the different categories, and then we're showing current in the second column, projected in the next column over percentage change, and then the dollar change. And so let's go through each one. Let's start with specific stop loss. And right now, the specific stop loss amount for the city is at $75,000. And we're assuming that with no change, it's going to increase by 25%.
Can you explain the specific stop loss? Because we've got some new council members.
That's a great question. And what that is for each individual who is covered by the county's plan sorry?
The city's plan.
City's plan, I'm sorry, thank you.
There you go.
Is covered by insurance. And so if a claim goes over $75,000 in a policy year, everything over and above 75 is covered by insurance. Okay, so that's specific stop loss.
It's a risk management tool to make certain that no one individual can completely use up the health insurance budget for an employer. So at this point, you have chosen to have a $75,000 specific stop loss that covers each individual.
We cover the first 75, and anything above 75 is covered by this insurance.
It's kind of a safety net. It kicks in then and helps pay the bills for the city.
So technically, we're partially self-insured.
Very, very good point. That's exactly right.
Yep. And the reason, one of the reasons we wanted to explain, you may say, well, why is that going up 25%? Okay? When we do these forecasts, until we get closer to the time that you actually renew, when we have the actual numbers, we use a market average increase. And the market average increase for stop loss goes up much higher at a much faster pace than other health insurance costs. And the reason for that is they're only kicking in at the very most expensive claims. So if you kind of just walk through a little bit of math with me, if the city had a claim this year of $100,000, the city pays $75,000 and the stop loss insurance pays $25,000, right? Well, next year that $100,000 is going to be, if we use an 8% trend, $108,000. So all things being equal, that claim will go from 100 to 108, right? The stop loss insurance company's liability just went from 25 to 33, which is a, I'm not that good at math, but about 25%. 30% increase, right? So when we're talking stop loss, the average increase, we call that deductible leverage. The average increase is going to go up much faster than the average increase in health insurance. So one of the other things that we as a consultant for our clients do is monitor what's the appropriate level for a given employer's stop loss to be, and based on our rate renewals, if we incrementally increase that amount, that $75,000, to offset that trend, that gives us much lower rate increases. So we do that risk management assessment. You know, Trina and your HR team will be very involved in that. But if I were somebody looking at this for the first time, I'd say, what on earth is a 25% increase? And that's why, the stop loss.
So to translate that a little bit for me, we're at 75,000. If we were to go to 70, our cost for this section of the insurance would go up because the insurance company has a higher risk to pay out. But if we go $5,000 the other way and go to 80,000, the cost for this section of the insurance goes down
Exactly.
because we're willing to assume more on our own.
And that's an excellent point, I think, Kyle. Another way to say it that people are familiar with in regard to their own insurance, it's like trying to buy insurance for your barn after the fire. It becomes much more expensive. And that's the principle that you just explained.
Yeah, so you pay less in the premium if you increase, just like on a personal plan, when I go from, on my car insurance, $100 deductible, my premium is significantly higher than if I go to a $1,000 deductible on a car.
Yep, you got it.
And the balance is how much risk do you want to absorb versus how much in fixed cost do you want to avoid, right? So those are all things as we get closer to the renewal, we will do a very micro analysis for you on. At this point, we just plug in that average just because that's really the only number we have at this point is an average number.
Okay.
Okay?
We will also be going out to market on that too,
Yep.
and seeing what we can do from that standpoint.
Yep.
And in general, stop-loss market has been competitive lately. And so I would consider this a conservative number at this point. Next down, fully insured transplant policy, and just to explain how this works. Normally, the stop-loss insurance, the specific we just talked about, includes coverage for transplants. But the concern with that is if you have a large claim, such as a transplant, it can make renewal much more difficult and place a lot more risk on the employer. And so one way to reduce that risk is to take a specific coverage like transplant, buy a policy for that, and remove that risk from the stop-loss plan. And that's what the city is doing right now. And if you look at the cost of that, they are reasonable considering risk, and we're projecting the increase for that to be just under 5%.
And in those fully insured transplant policies, the risk of the first 75,000, they assume that as well. So this is an all-in cost if you have a transplant. And while we hope that there aren't any transplants in any given employer, we do know that the incidence, because technology is advancing, we know the incidence and frequency of transplants is going up. So this just, again, helps the city to manage risk in a defined area where they could get a reasonably good premium to help offset that risk.
Next item is administration. This is the amount that the city pays to Oxient, the administrator, to perform as your insurance company. And so we're showing the amount and showing an increase of about 5%.
And we plug that in. We don't know this for a fact, but we just plug in kind of an average. This is, as Jan said, we will be going to market, so we'll be checking their cost competitiveness as well. Oxient is a very competitive third-party administrator, though. They have very competitive administrative fees.
Next up is the medical reserve surcharge. We've talked about that and where that's at. Current, we're showing the amount for the full year. For renewal, projected, we're taking that out. We're assuming that one, good fortune with the plan running so far in 2015 will continue, that the fund balance will continue to rise, and that we won't have a need to keep that going in 2016.
And that was the whole idea. So that's good takeaway from this is that we don't plan to do the surcharge in 2016, and I plan to tell the employees that as well, and they'll be happy because we've all been assuming that cost, so that's very, very good news.
Next item up is the ACA, the Affordable Care Act reinsurance fee, and that's actually going down. If anybody wants an explanation on what the reinsurance fee is.
Please.
Okay. It's an amount of money put aside for the insurance companies who choose to participate in the exchange. And so we just talked about stop loss. And so this fund is being used for those insurance companies. If a claim comes in over a certain dollar amount, and I'm not sure what that is, the reinsurance fund will reinsure that insurance company for that amount.
So essentially, it's a stop loss for the insurance company
Yes.
that participate in the exchange.
Right.
Because if you recall, insurance companies who participate in the exchange cannot deny access for medical reasons to any person. So if somebody is critically ill and is running up, $100,000 a month in health claims, they can't turn them away. So the insurance plans can't turn them away any longer. So they know that there was adverse selection, we call that, built into the exchanges. So they are taxing all employers to contribute to a fund to help
Mitigate
offset
that
those
risk.
costs. Exactly, for the insurance companies. Otherwise, they would get no insurance companies to participate in the exchanges.
Now, the irritating thing for employers such as yourself is this is a fund you're paying into that you don't get to take advantage. Yes. But just to give you a little history on this, too, when it first came out in 2013, if I get my numbers right, the amount was $77 charged on an annual basis per covered person. This year it was $44. Next year it's projected to be $27. And the question is, from that point forward, what will the fund need? So right now, things are just beginning with the exchange. I don't know how much has been paid out, but I'm sure that calculation will be done, and for 17, we'll find out what the amount will be. So the plan, the original plan was that it would go away, but we'll wait and see. Next is the patient-centered outcome research fee, and that ends up being $2 per covered life. That's not changing, and just to quickly explain what that is, again, through the Affordable Care Act, that's a fund being put aside for the medical community to use to look for better processes, better health care, better outcomes, to help to do research, to hopefully lower cost long-term. So total fixed cost, we're adding up everything above, then claim costs. And a little bit more information on this. What we're doing, and again, Marty nor I are actuaries, but we play one at renewal time. We do have an actuary on staff with Associated Financial Group that we do work with, provides us with this information. But what we did was we looked at 24 months of claims for the city. We divided them into 12-month periods, and then we trended that forward. And in doing that analysis, our outcome is we're projecting that the city does not need to change its funding for claims for 2016 compared to what it is today for 2015. So we're saying keep that the same. So we add that up, do all the math, and our projection as we sit today for 2016 is there's actually going to be a decrease in expected costs for the self-funded plan for 2016. And the percent is 1.72%, or just under $200,000.
We'll be updating this both as we get closer to the renewal, but also as we get the results of the marketing to see what else might be out there. Are there better options for the city, whether it's self-funded, like you are today, or fully insured? We'll be looking at all options for you, and then we'll update this forecast as we get the results of that marketing and we get closer to the renewal. But at this point, things are looking very good for the city. You're stable. Looks like there would be, hopefully at worst, no increase whatsoever, just even maybe a little decrease.
And I think it's worth restating, this assumes that you're not making any changes. You're not changing the plan design, you're not changing the specific stop-loss amount, everything is staying as it is.
And with that said, we still have to keep our eye on 2018. We're not avoiding 2018 this way. It's very good news, and it's, when you give good news, you always couch it with statements so that you don't appear too optimistic. It's very good news, but at the same time, you got to go back to that Cadillac Tax graph and say, but we're still, something's on the horizon, and we have to address that. So addressing the plan and the plan design is still relevant. To the degree we do get success with the clinic, how do we get people to use the clinic more to get our costs down, and create incentives or disincentives, depending on how you look at it, to get people to use the clinic? If that saves us money, we've got to do that, because there's no ifs, ands, or buts. We got to avoid the Cadillac tax. Just no end of discussion. So we have to do things to keep that in mind. We just can't wait till 2018 and say, okay, how we doing? We have to develop a plan. As I said, we need a soft landing into 2018 so we can avoid the Cadillac tax in 2018 and every year after that. And that's going to take a lot of planning.
John, does that take into consideration our negotiated contracts with police, fire, and transit?
Yes.
Because there's increases built in there for what the employee pays, right, towards the plan?
Moving forward, there is. We didn't separate that out in terms of revenue, additional revenue that might be coming in, just as, Mark talked about the Cadillac tax. And you remember when she talked about, Marty and Jan talked about it initially, it was based on an 8% trend. As we go forward, we'll have to go back and adjust those projections. And just as you pointed out, Steve, we're going to have to take a look at that revenue and adjust as we go forward. But we tried to be as conservative as we could be to point out the need that we have to be mindful of that Cadillac tax.
Because that's my concern
Going
when
forward.
you were talking about cost shifts, where
Yep.
three-quarter, or about 50% of our employees are negotiated contracts. It's hard sometimes to negotiate cost shifts because of if we have to go to arbitration on some of that stuff.
It is, and I think, the idea that was brought forward by the Cadillac tax, and not to belabor that, is, as we all talked about the last time we met, we want to try to shrink our overall costs. That's really the goal. Shifting it across the table is not going to help us shrink the cost. We got to shrink the pie. That's why the investment in the
Right.
clinic is a strategy, and we have to come up with others, too.
Because I know the former mayor talked a lot about during the budget cycle, the cost shift and, the plan cost. He brought that up all the time, that,
Yep.
where can we make some adjustments in those two areas?
Right,
And it's difficult when you got to negotiate with three-quarters of your employees.
But we can, and as far as negotiations go, we can negotiate on premiums, but we don't have to negotiate on a plan.
Correct, our plan design is not
We can
subject
design
to...
whatever
Yep.
is that we can design a plan
Here it is.
accordingly.
With the exception of transit group. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, you're right.
So I do want to remind everybody that this is a projection as we sit here today. It's with information through April. I'm guessing that Colin was looking back at the Cadillac tax, and his question might be that if this holds true, and this is the renewal for 2016, we saved ourselves 8% on the Cadillac tax based on our calculation.
We avoided 1 year of that 8%
put it off.
increase.
Well,
Put it off,
We've-
but we have to keep our eye on the ball.
Right.
because, well, right now, we have to, if we're assuming an 8%, looking at where we are at with this projection so far, in the first year of the Cadillac tax, we're paying it.
Yep.
And we're substantially over
Yep.
the costs. And the medical trend that you came up with, the 8%, how long did you have to average to get that 8%? To come up with is that an industry standard, or is that one that it's a 5-year rolling average over the last 5 years, our average is 8%, or?
It's an economic trend that the medical economists kind of give us each year to say, what do they expect? The underlying cost of healthcare, if you paid $1 for it last year, exactly the same care, what would you pay for it this year? And so
Okay.
the economists, the healthcare economists determine that. That's not group-specific to an employer. It's an economic trend, industry standard economic trend. That might vary a little bit from year to year. So in years past, for those people who might have been in the employee benefit world for many years, we had economic medical trend approaching 20%. Not that John's old or anything, but he probably remembers that.
I do.
Okay? So, so do I.
Well, the reason I ask that is, when we're looking at this, there was with a nationwide recession and so on and so forth, economic indicators that had a shorter term tended not to reflect the market actuality because of the trend line. And when you talk about these fluctuations, those numbers weren't accounting for that. And so on this 8%, are we looking at this being a conservative estimate, or is this the one where we project 8%, but all of a sudden, 3 years from now, as the economy recovers, the consumer price index goes up, now we're looking at 10, 12, 15, 20%?
It's a forecast actually going forward, not looking back. So
Okay.
what they look at is the pace that technology in the medical field is changing. Okay, how quickly is technology changing? How quickly are consumers becoming better consumers in healthcare? So it's an economic trend looking forward. not an average looking back.
Okay.
If that helps.
And I would
That
suggest,
that does help. Thank you.
if you go to the Cadillac Tax slide, just for the sake of discussion, forget about the 8 or the 3, the numbers are there. If the Cadillac Tax was in place today, if the law was in place today that we had to pay it in 2015 rather than wait till 2018, we'd be paying a Cadillac tax on the single plan already. And based on this trend, we'd be paying the Cadillac tax on the family plan next year in 2016. That shows you the urgency that we need to address this issue. This isn't waiting for 3 years and saying, well, how are we doing?
Well, my next question is that 1.72% there, how would that affect us going forward? If we break it down into the cost of our plan, does that mean our plan costs, which for calendar year 2015 is listed as $10,243, would go down by
Good.
1.7? So
Yes.
Yes.
that percentage can be reflected in both the plan cost of the individual. Okay.
So
And it could be refactored into the Cadillac tax estimate.
since we're looking at a pass, one way to look at that is to take the numbers and move them down a year. So the numbers for 15 can be moved down to 16 and bump them all down after that. So you bought yourself a year by doing that.
But that, if we're looking at this chart,
Yep.
that 1.72 to help us avoid the Cadillac tax, that number needs to be greater
Yes,
than 8%.
Correct.
correct.
So we're a third of the way to where we need to be, but if we're going to make this plan successful in the future and avoid this rather substantial tax, we need to come up with another $400,000 in cost reductions every year. And we need to keep doing that.
Well, as long as the medical trend number exceeds the general inflation trend,
Yep.
we're always playing catch-up. We're losing 5% every year. Even if you were perfect today, if that trend holds true, we're losing 5% every year. It's a race we
Probably
can't
can never get
necessarily-
there, but we can close the gap and probably pay less.
And then we hope that the feds look at it and say, is this a reasonable thing to do? Unfortunately, they need this Cadillac tax to pay for the,
For
to
those
pay
that
for
don't
it.
have it, right.
They'll find a way to,
Right.
money doesn't disappear.
So, yeah, we
in their
got the
budget.
6%, then we'd only pay a 2% penalty, right? Not the full 8%, right?
Right, we pay it out.
Whatever our gap is, that's what we would pay,
Whatever we're over.
yeah.
So right now, we'd be paying a tax on $43. If you take a look at 2015, if the Cadillac tax existed today, we'd pay 40% of only $43, but
We'd
it'd
still be paying it.
We'd still be paying it. And if it increases by 8% next year, but the threshold, the feds increased by only 3%, we've just lost 5%. And then it's just going to keep
Oh.
pacing itself that we're going to
Right.
be far away from it. So we gotta jump at this thing now.
And how does our trend line relate to the age of our workforce currently and in the past? So is our workforce substantially younger in 2015 than it was in 2011, 12, and 13? Or is our workforce aging? Because there is a direct correlation between age and consumption of medical services.
I guess I would say that in comparison to where we were in 2011 and 12, I would say our workforce, and this is just an estimate, is younger than it was then. One of the other things that, if you recall, we had take place were Acts 10 and 32, and we had an exodus of employees based on our implementation of a salary study. And as a matter of fact, we even incentivized those people who decided they wanted to retire early if they gave us enough notice so we could adequately replace them. We even incentivized that activity. So I can't say for certain, that all the people that replaced those that retired were younger, but I'd be willing to bet you a beer that we are younger than we were then. And not to stray too far from your question, but I think some of the spikes that were experienced during that time period that we all talked about as a group, some of the high-cost claims, I think that we experienced the phenomenon of accelerating people's behavior in terms of health care before they retire. In other words, before people retire, it's not uncommon for them to have their body parts fixed. And the technology exists now today to have many more body parts fixed than they used to. New hips, new knees, all kinds of different things that can take place now that only, 5 years ago were much more cumbersome and difficult. So when we think about what happened to us as an organization, I don't want to blame everything on X10 and 32, but when we accelerated that process where people were retiring early, we also accelerated the claims intentionally or unintentionally because people were getting those body parts fixed, and then they left the organization. Now, hopefully that's going to stabilize because we don't want to get into a situation where we're not realizing the revenue that we need because we don't have as many people on the plan. So there's some other impacts that we need to consider too, but I hope that we're past some of those anomalous spikes that took place that really set us back. And I know that was very difficult for council, especially during the budget process. But we need to be careful and we need to be mindful of all these things that we're talking about today.
So where do we go from here? And our next steps, we at AFG want to start at the beginning. We want to do our due diligence and check out every part of the health plan. And so as a first step to that, we are going to go out to bid. And that means for a third-party administrator, looking at the PPO network, pharmacy benefit manager, stop loss, like we've already talked about. We're also going to look at fully insured plans. We want to compare that to the self-funded to make sure, again, that we're doing our due diligence. And so the timeline, actually on the next slide, we're going to start that process now, and we're hoping to have results by the end of the month, and then present it to the city after that. The other thing I have on the next steps too that I think is important, because we're talking about changes in the plan because of the Cadillac tax, and I think to the extent that we can, we want to work with employees, communicate what's happening, what the Cadillac tax is, and why things need to be done, and plan design change and what options are available to them. So the idea of establishing an employee committee and working with them to, first of all, educate, let them know what's happening and why, and then talk about potential options.
And if I could just add to that, I think, that's something that we talked about as a group. That's something that we very much appreciate council support for that, as well as the clinic in the past. And I think the discussion about the Cadillac tax, I think, will be a good one because the employees will need to understand that it's not about cost shifting. We need to reduce costs as a whole, as an organization, or it's going to impact the employees as well as the city. So I think that we had good dialogue in the past in our committees, but I think the fact that that is a unilateral reality for the city and employees, I think will generate hopefully some new ideas and some commitment toward trying to address some of these issues, because if we don't, the employees as well as the city are going to be impacted, and I think it's easy for them to recognize that.
It's a rare opportunity where
It really is.
You're both in the same position, you're both having to deal with the same issue. How are you going to work together to deal with it?
I think it's a good opportunity to engage the employees too, and hopefully we can, the changes in our plan design that the employee committee recommended city manager roll off were helpful as part of these reductions in cost, and I'm hopeful that they'll be willing to step up and work on additional ideas going forward.
What employees are you looking for the committee?
Sue, do you have an idea?
8 to 10. I already have surveyed them and I have responses back. Okay.
Awesome.
Our last slide, proposed timeline, we already talked about it, sending out the request for proposal, getting the results back in early July, presenting those, making decisions, implementing the changes, establishing fund levels and rates, and then finalize stop loss renewal late September, early October, and then open.
And just go back that previous slide, the proposals will include fully insured options as well, in keeping with council's direction.
And we're hopeful that, we don't want to put AFG on the spot too much, but we're hopeful that if we can reduce some of the fixed costs associated with some of the vendors that we currently work with, we'll be able to push that 1.72 number down even a little further. That'd be the goal.
We expect to find some opportunities. It's difficult to quantify that right now. Let's do due diligence and find out.
So that was your forward-looking statement, correct? Your forward-looking statement disclaimer?
Yes.
And obviously, these are projections, but, you know, I think the Supreme Court is taking up the Affordable Care Act, and that could throw the whole medical thing or the whole insurance field into an uproar, depending on what comes out of that. Though, out of that issue, plus, I know there's still discussion of Republicans trying to make some changes in the Affordable Care Act if they can.
This is, will be an important year because of the Supreme Court. That decision is expected this month. That is the decision on whether or not federal exchanges can get, run exchanges can get subsidies. So that decision will have an impact along with the change in the Congress to the more Republican. So we do not, our position at AFG is that we know there will be some changes somewhere in the Affordable Care Act. We make our recommendations based on what we know today because we can't afford to assume that something will be repealed or changed, and then we modify those recommendations as changes occur. So we have 6 attorneys on staff, and I think somebody might be an attorney here, I'm not sure, but they do a great job for us. So we're very, very I thought maybe I had an introduction on somebody who was an attorney, but we are so thankful to have them on board because they keep us very in tune with what's going on with the Affordable Care Act. So
That being said, if we, let's just say as we lock in a plan or a calendar year, if changes come in that, can we open the plans once we kind of sign a contract, John? Can we do that? Can we make changes based on law changes?
the law usually will change in advance, so they'll say at your first renewal on or after the law is passed on, July 15th. So they'll say, so they've not, on any kind of regular basis, required us to make either immediate or retroactive changes. It's usually the renewal date on or after.
And I think, Steve, if I understand what you're getting at, as you mentioned earlier, we have different proposals built into the labor agreement where we're going to accelerate by X percent. Right. But it really is all dependent upon what we set our rate at. Okay. So in other words, those are caps, not to exceed. But if we set the rate at a certain level, we may not go all the way up as far as what we have the ability to do in the labor agreement. And I think maybe that's what you're getting at?
Yeah.
Is that correct, Sue, to state it that way?
Right.
So it all depends on where we set the rate.
Okay.
Any further questions from council?
That's what we had in the form of a presentation, so that's the
Okay,
end of our
that's
slide.
great. Thanks very much, Marty Burns and Jan Stage from Associated Financial Group, Fitz and Sue, for all your work on this.
You're welcome. Thanks for
This is
allowing us to have
this
this
is what
workshop.
we've been looking for, and
Good.
anxious to move forward. Our council meeting is at 6 o'clock, so we have
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Wow. Mark in order.
We are adjourned without, to go through adjourning.
There you go.
Thank you.